Hi, everybody. This is Margarita Kiwis. I'm host for Solve for X, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Matt Hall. So, Matt is a conversion design consultant who helps businesses solve human problems. He and his spouse, Micah, lead CommonPeople, a web content studio whose mission is to democratize opportunity through technology. They help nonprofits and purpose driven businesses achieve their measurable goals, usually through better digital storytelling. Matt, welcome to our show.
Thank you
So
so
good to
much for
have you.
having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I am too. So, when we did the pre broadcast warm up, it was such a fun conversation. Um, and I want to start a little bit with your backstory of how you got to focusing on like purpose-driven companies, and especially around one of our favorite topics is how do you weave ethics and ethics that how do you operationalize ethics in organizations, and what does ethics mean to you as a designer as well. But we're going to start, and we're just going to go and hit all the high points here. So how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, my father teaches history at Cal State Fullerton. He's a freeway flyer, so he teaches at a couple other schools here in Southern California. And I grew up in like the LA area in a really interesting time because in 1990, in the city I grew up in, it was something like 75% white. And then by the time I graduated high school, it was like 33% white. So I had this completely different shift. And I am so bland and white. I look like a background character in a Scooby Doo cartoon. Um, but I was able to be in this really interesting position where I was able to see that being kind of in the middle of two worlds where I had a position of privilege, just being a white dude, but at the same time I was seeing the demographic changes that was allowing me to also have this sense of otherness as well. And I think what that did is it gave me a really cool sense of empathy and appreciation. Obviously, not the same as growing up non-white. But I think it kind of turned me on to the idea that the world isn't fair for everybody in the same way. And my father teaching history, kind of specializing in like New Deal and welfare programs and stuff, also made me very aware of some of the inequities in the world and wanting to do something about it. I wanted to be a teacher. I thought maybe contributing to academia in some way would be my path towards maybe bringing a little more equity into the world. And I was sitting in a faculty meeting as a graduate student where I realized this is not how I want to spend the rest of my career. And just seeing the writing on the wall about adjunct faculty and what's happening in higher ed, how it's kind of collapsing in on itself due to some external pressures, realizing this isn't how I'm going to make my impact. So I ended up in the web content space, and I got in a very interesting time because the majority of this is around the time that content strategy kind of got a name. People have been doing content strategy. Web 1.0. I grew up with Web 1.0, so I was kind of seeing how people were using technology to bring communities together that never could have been together otherwise, thanks to the internet. But it was starting to get more of a structure, more of a discipline around this time that I was coming up in my career. So I was able to kind of grow along and see opportunities to, you know, look out for people who weren't me, ways to be more inclusive, even before more conversations were happening around inclusive design, and just kind of trying to do the right thing. I eventually got an MBA where I learned the difference between morals and ethics, and that's a really fun conversation. Um, but and now I'm just trying to do kind of trying to have it both ways, where I'm trying to work in a world that's I'm trying to be profitable. I'm trying to run a business that pays the bills, especially allows my spouse and I to support a family in Southern California, which is one of the only markets um, where the Bay Area is slightly more expensive, and just trying to help as many people as we can through the opportunities through tech.
So you said something that caught my ear, which is like the difference between morals and ethics. And how is ethics taught in business school? And then how did that, and then, So like you have your growing up experience and your dad in the context of being a history professor and this long view and how do you do the right thing. Then you go to school and then you learn business ethics and then you're in practice. How are those different and how are they the same?
Yeah, well, I took a business ethics class as part of my MBA program, and I was just shocked when I was sitting there one day when they were clearly explaining in business, the most ethical thing you can do is make profits for your shareholders, which didn't just didn't sit well with me. I think that ultimately, in the big picture, if you're helping your customers thrive, if you're adding value to your customers' lives, well, doesn't that take care of profits on its own? To me, short-term profits for shareholders, I think about tobacco companies, right? Well, yeah, quarterly profits are up, but like they're all going to be dead in 10 years. What are you going to do then? It seems kind of unethical long-term to focus so much on short-term profitability. So I could see some kind of discrepancy there and realize that I needed to kind of develop my own set of ethics and trust, have an act of faith almost, that as long as I followed my code of ethics and tried to do the right thing, whether I was working as an employee or running my own business, that I would be able to connect with customers who felt the same way I did. And that the profitability, that the stability, the money would just work itself out. And so far it has. I'm youngish. I'm 35, so I'm not like brand new, 20 years old, ready to take on the world and disrupt an industry I don't understand. That's not what I do. But so far from what I've seen, I look at other companies that are more mature than my little shop, and I'm encouraged. I just re-listened to the conversation you had, the Airbnb webinar about ethics.
Oh, Reb Chestnut. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And that was just so inspiring to hear about, and realizing that, mature companies, Microsoft as well, right? I love Microsoft. I love how quiet Microsoft is. There's this kind of mature confidence that I feel like Microsoft has positioned itself within the market, where it knows it can do the right thing and doesn't have to worry about trying to play any of the funny games you see with earlier stage startups.
Yeah, there's this is curious thing about like business. Either you are trying to hustle people out of money,
Mm,
right? And we all know those kinds of operators, and they're not creating any value. It's just very extractive. It's the worst kind of capitalism, right? And then there's the rest of us who are saying like, we've identified a need and we want to solve that problem, whatever that problem might be. Um, and whatever magic we can bring to it, it might be that, we can create an extraordinary customer experience, or we can um, do this so efficiently, so that it's maximum value with minimum cost, or all sorts of different ways that you can design your company, design the solution. And certainly within our work, when we look at reimagining companies and reimagining capitalism, it's really saying you have to make mutual benefit in excess of the cost,
yes.
right? To either party. It's got to be net beneficial to both, because that's actually sustainable, because then we can do it again. But if it's extractive, it's sort of like a hit and run. Like you took everything you could out of that person and you've moved on to the next one, right? And eventually you run out of people. I mean, that comes to an end. It may seem profitable, extremely profitable for some period of time, but it will come to an end because it's not sustainable. But if we can have something that has sort of like this natural back and forth where we're creating value for each other, I think that's also the opportunity to build really meaningful relationships. So when you're doing your company, I know that you've been talking about like different kinds of appeals, and knowing the three appeals. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, a lot of what we try to do is empower people to make ethical decisions on a day-to-day basis. And I know a lot of your conversations are with individuals who are in high levels of position and power, right? Where they can lead, lead big organizations into acting more ethically. And sometimes you need that, right? Um, there's some organizations where if the leaders aren't being ethical, there's not much you can do if you're in lower ranks. I don't know if we're allowed to name names on this show, but like if there's a story this week about how Mark Zuckerberg chose to not deplatform like Alex Jones as quickly as he should have. Well, no designer, nobody working at Facebook, 4 or 5 levels down is going to be able to override Mark Zuckerberg's decision, period. Right? There's that kind of big picture top-down leadership we need, but there's also the bottom-up leadership and the small kind of ethical decisions you don't hear about in the news every day. And these are the kind of things that we try to build into our projects and to make more sustainable. And when we're thinking about sustainability, we're thinking about the ways that people can come in and out of an organization and continue to operate with the same level of interest and concern about their users. And so a lot of our work is all of our work is very heavily based in user research. But a lot of my work that I do as well, and with mentoring and trying to coach people who are early in their careers, is to teach them how they can appeal to create a more ethical workplace from the bottom up. And so, as you mentioned, there are 3 different tools that I try to teach people to use so that these little conversations, not as big as like, do we ban Nazis from our platform? Well, that's probably not your job, right? You should, by the way. That's a hard yes, ban Nazis.
Yeah.
But but questions of, okay, is this email I'm going to send out, is that going to be spam, or is it going to be actually adding value to my audience? What kind of imagery do we use on our website, right? Do we choose to use inclusive language or not? Is our Black History Month statement, who's reading that before we send it out? It's not just a bunch of white people, is it? I've had a few of those moments where it's like, let's talk to some other people who aren't just white dudes with beards, and maybe have them vet this statement first. And so there's 3 different appeals. The first one is to appeal to just ethics. And this can also be like a personal sense of morality. And this is where you need to know for yourself, what do you stand for, right? What's your ultimate outcome? In business, your ethics is the series of decisions you make based on whatever your ultimate responsibility is going to be. And to a lot of companies, that is to their shareholders. Well, in your own career, you're the CEO of your own career, right? Your responsibility is to yourself. And you need to be doing good work because that benefits you in the long run. But you also need to remember that you're not going to be at any company forever. Every job you've ever had has been temporary, and your employers don't want you to be thinking about that, but you need to be thinking about that because it gives you a lot of power. And so when you're in a situation where you see someone encouraging you to act unethically, whether it's being asked to do something that is, not in your user's best interests, or if it's something that is not, is going to harm the company long term, but bring short-term reward, you need to be willing to stand up and say, hold on, I don't think this is right. Let's talk about this. And just being able to stand up and have that conversation shifts the entire power dynamic in that, because then you're no longer sitting back and saying, okay, what do you want me to do? Okay, I'm going to do it. You're saying, well, you need to now justify this. You've asked me to do something that you and I both kind of know is unethical. Now you need to justify it. And you're putting that pressure on them to justify an action that is unethical. And it's hard to do because it's unethical. And it's hard to justify unethical behavior.
So it's interesting. I was talking to Solitaire Townsend yesterday. She runs Futera out of the UK, sustainability agency. And I was asking her, like, what would you want people to do? And she says, put things into words. And so like actually use words like environmental justice. Be the person who brings these terms into the boardroom or into the meeting room or into the design space and say, what about this? And she said, half the people are going to say like, what are you talking about? It's not going to register. The other half, some portion are going to say, I'm curious, why did you bring that up? And then there's going to be another group of people who would say, I'm so glad you said that because I was thinking that, but I wasn't brave enough to say it out loud, right? And so even with ethics, how do we integrate it into our everyday flow? So as a designer, how do you integrate ethics into the everyday conversation as you're doing your design work?
Yeah, asking those questions and being infinitely curious, being aware of the people that you're serving and then spending time with the real users. There's a tendency to over rely on data. We look at these big data sets we can now work with, and that's like really exciting because we're learning so much about people that we never could have known before. But we also tend to lose view of the actual humans using our products and services. We make assumptions. And sometimes just sitting with somebody and watching them use the tool is enough to break us from those assumptions and realize, oh, this is not quite work how I wanted. Just a simple example. Earlier, just today, my father was trying to get Dropbox set up on his home computer. And there's a simple box where you just paste your one-time use code for his login. You paste this code and you log in. Very simple. He's been using computers since the 80s. Command or Control V, like that's paste. He's been doing that forever. And he got to this box and it was just something that he just wasn't sure what to do. And he's not, he's still sharp. So it's not like a cognitive decline thing. It's just that the interface, it was in a different mode than he was used to with using these simple copy paste shortcuts. Little things like that when you're designing, you're not really thinking about because you're so used to the affordances that you take for granted, right? The act as affordances for you.
So how did he feel when he ran into that?
Yeah.
What was his affect? What emotions came up?
He just got stuck, right? And it wasn't long enough. Like I was there to step in and to say, oh, you just have to like paste it here. There's a paste button there. You can, Control V with, but it was just long enough for him to go, what do I do? And that slowdown, right? And if we're talking about conversion rate optimization, if we're talking about engagement on a platform, that kind of slowdown hurts engagement. So it hurts the kinds of metrics that I think a lot of people are looking at when they're building apps. But now let's look at what's happening with the COVID vaccine registration, right? And all these different real world applications, web apps, and phone apps, depending on where you live, same thing is happening. And so then you're having somebody who is probably going to be over 65 or in the high risk category, who's also eligible to be part of the first wave of people registering for this vaccine. If you didn't do enough testing, and if you're waiting for data to roll in live versus like doing the testing as you're building the thing, you're going to have a lot of people who are confused and frustrated and who might actually have their lives negatively affected in a very real way. So this isn't just abstract. This isn't just like, are people spending as much time as we want them to on Instagram today? This is, are people able to access critical health and other resources that they need to maintain the quality of life that we promised to them?
That's interesting because you don't think about the ethical consequences of bad design. You don't think of like, wow, because there's so much friction in using this platform, that someone will give up and as a consequence not get vaccinated in time and have at best it'll be mild, at worst they'll be hospitalized, if not permanently impaired in some way, if not die, because the UX UI was so poor. I was helping my husband because he was frustrated with getting vaccinated. He's 65. And so I said, okay, well, because I'm helping my mom in San Diego. So send me the website. It's a good text. And I'm going and I'm looking at it, and I go through it, and I kind of, I through trial and error, because this doesn't bother me because I have a lot of confidence when it comes to technology. I always think, oh, I'll be able to figure this out. So it's more of one of persistence and perseverance than it is about, I'm frustrated. And you have to enter all this information about yourself. And then it had a pull down of these different locations. You would pick a location and then to tell you that there were no vaccinations available. Boom, done, kicked out. And you're going like, you can't show me all the vaccinations that are available in this region and then just I'll go to the location, so it's kind of backwards, right? Because I'm thinking, find the date. If I drive 5 miles or 10 miles or 15 miles, I don't care. I just want the date, right? But they weren't optimizing for date, they were optimizing for location. And then it would kick you out. And then if you wanted to look at another location, you had to start the process all over again, enter your name, your address, your age, did you have any comorbidities, blah, 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 blah. And you go through, 20 million steps to get back to, can I make an appointment? And I just kept on looping through, and I go, oh, I've got to do this 6 times. Fine. And I got him an appointment. Likewise with my mom, because my sisters was saying, go check out the grocery store because you can get vaccinations at the Vons, at the CVS. And press release about CVS making vaccinations available. And they said, we saw this. I go to the CVS website. It's not available in California. And you go, so I can see someone who's older who just doesn't have, just like navigating all of that, just throwing up their hands. And for lay people who don't spend their time developing technology or really, really conversant in how UX UI ought to work, that they could be very easily thwarted. But you don't think about it as in terms of the moral or ethical consequences. Yeah. How would you have done it differently?
Well, in that situation, to me, it seems like they didn't user test it with real people. It seems like they designed it and they went through internally and said, yeah, makes sense to me, because I guarantee that having 2 or 3 people go through the process, they would have seen somebody have the same frustration you expressed, right? And that's where another one of those ethical decisions on the ground can happen, where it's like, hey, I'm a designer. We're building this thing. I'd like to test it with some of our real users, right? You can go to your manager and you can say, can we test this with 3 people? We can do it over Zoom and we'll send them a Starbucks gift card. People, your users are flattered when you reach out to them and you say, can I test this with you? You're so important to us. We value your input and you could shape what the future of this app looks like. Will you give us 15 minutes and run through this new software with us? People will do it. And you give them a coffee, and then suddenly you have real qualitative information you can use to make the app even better and more inclusive, because you're going to have them approach it in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise. And making sure we're building that into the process are people who are not like me, whether that's as tech literate as I am, whether it's people who come from the same background I do, whether it's people who have the same goals and outcomes I do, or objectives that I do, are people who are not like me using this before we send it to the public. Because that's how you're going to find the things. It's doing the extra work that costs the company just a little bit more, but ultimately helps the final product serve its audience so much better. So
yeah, definitely. I agree. So then your next appeal. So one is the burden of proof of doing the right thing in the organization. And then we're looking at doing the right thing, even for the design of the application, because there's this tension. I know that Mira Lane talked about it at Microsoft, of like and Rob did as well, like the pressure to ship versus the pressure versus engineering it so it does the right thing. And people seeing ethics as a cost rather than and a drag on getting your product out. And in this case with these vaccination appointment websites, they got them out, but they're terrible, so they don't work. So then you go, well, yeah, technically you met your deadline.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's a value added step, right? Seeing these kinds of things, making sure that our products are ethical through testing, getting real people involved. It's a value added step where, yeah, it's an extra step, but at the end of it, you either know that it works right and you have confidence and you can go to your shareholders and say, this works right, we tested it. Or you can find ways it doesn't work and then you can fix it. And then you can go to your shareholders and say, we tested it and we fixed it and now it's even better and ready for market. Right? It's having the humility and the confidence to say, oh, if it's not right, we'll fix it, but we're going to keep testing to find ways we can always improve it. So sometimes you appeal to ethics and you say, this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing for your shareholders who are paying you to do this thing right. It's the right thing for our customers who are going to be using this thing, whose lives are going to be affected by it. And sometimes you still don't get through. I had a situation where early in my career, I had a boss and it was for a wellness company. He wanted to do this big promotion, and in retrospect, the company was starting to run a little low on cash, and he really just wanted to get sales. And he says, I want to email everybody who's ever been on our email list, whether they've unsubscribed or not. I want to reach out to them, and I want them to buy something. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not sending an email out to people who've unsubscribed. It's not ethical. And he says, well, I want you to do it anyway. And at that point, I realized he didn't care about the ethics of it, but I had the next appeal, which is the appeal to the law. And I said, we could be fined up to under $250,000 for every email we send to somebody who has unsubscribed. And that got him to realize, oh, this is not something that I want to be participating in. And as designers, as creatives, as even if we're a technologist, if we make something, we need to understand the legal framework we operate in. We need to understand what the laws are, right? And there's so many new laws every year, especially in California, which has some of the most privacy focused and consumer friendly laws in tech. That's not to say we're consumer friendly, because there's a lot of ways we can improve, but I think we're doing better than a lot of other places. And understanding what those laws are, and then being able to say to our bosses, well, what you're asking me isn't just unethical, it's also illegal. And if you want, we can run this by HR, or we can run this by the legal department before we ship it, and we can see what they say, or we can find a different approach. And that tends to be pretty effective as well. It's not always the most effective. Going back to companies, Uber's Grayball program, right? Okay, not that was where they were tracking high-profile individuals and then hiding other Uber cars that were available in the area in places where they hadn't been authorized to operate yet, right? Well, that's not just unethical; it's also illegal. Okay, that's not cool. There are still things happening every day that ride really close to the line between what is or isn't legal, and especially in spaces that are like disruptive, right? Unfortunately, disruptive often means sociopathic, and the rules don't apply to me because I'm too brave for the rules. Well, the rules are there for a reason, and so as the people who are on the ground, we can decide if our bosses choose to continue trying to operate something illegally, and we've brought this up to them and we've done our job to make sure that they know what the risks are. That leads to the third appeal, which is just to quit. And I don't know if you remember the line or the movie We Bought a Zoo. I think I watched it like one time once. It not what I refer to a lot, but there's this line in there where he says it just takes 10 seconds of courage to do the right thing. And I don't remember anything else in the movie other than that line. And that's true, because sometimes all we need to do is just be brave for 10 seconds. And that alone gives us the leverage we need to ultimately make sure that something that's going to harm our users, harm the communities we're trying to serve, doesn't exist. Because if we all quit, if we say, I'm not going to work here anymore, if this is what we're going to build, well, then they're not going to have the best designers. They're not going to have the best developers. They're not going to have the best people to build the kinds of disruptive tech that could possibly harm people.
And it's interesting, as I talk to entrepreneurs and others, there seems to be a desire for serial entrepreneurs and innovators to do something that actually has meaning and impact. They're saying like, okay, I made my money, I did this, I did that, but I for guilt, conscience, age, legacy, kids, whatever, they're saying, I got to do something and be aligned with something and be aligned with a team that wants to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's scary, right? It's scary to have a job where you've got shares that'll be vesting in 6 months and great health insurance and all the other benefits and perks that some companies use to keep you where you are, and to try to discourage you from saying, no, I'm not on board with this. I can't work here anymore. There's a lot of pressure to stay where you are. And even from a very young age, right? We're taught you work hard, you get rewarded with this great job, and then you end up in the great job. And there's all this pressure from your whole life trying to keep you into just complying and going along with something that maybe in your heart isn't quite what you want to do. And one of the things I like to share with people is that there are individuals, there are companies out there you can work with who are aligned with you. There are so many opportunities out there. And what a lot of people miss is just how many opportunities there are that they don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Same with building something. If you're not actively looking at jobs, if you're not actively trying to see what's on the market right now, you're not going to see, you're not going to be as mentally open to the idea that like you can walk away and find something else. And so I think it's really important just as a mental exercise, an exercise in optimism and in confidence, to always have those job alerts going, to always be looking and seeing, okay, what other gigs are there around me? To be always entertaining conversations with recruiters or others, because then that kind of at least tells us the mental story. If this goes south, if I refuse to build something or to do something unethical, I have other options. And that gives you so much power in that conversation because you have the walkaway power. You're not letting them hold all the chips. You're not letting your manager, who's trying to pressure you into skipping user testing for this public health app, right? Or whatever happened. I won't presume to know what happened behind the scenes with the vaccination locator app, but I've seen conversations like that happening where, well, no, let's just use this stock photo or whatever. We don't need to worry about representation. We don't need to worry about inclusive language, right? This isn't a conversation we need to have. It takes too long. Well, okay, managers that are pushing you to do that, they don't deserve your best work, and they don't deserve the talent and quality that if you're listening to this, because of you, Margarita, not because of me, but if you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in making the world a more ethical place. And so you are already rising to the top of the talent pool, and you deserve to be working in a place that recognizes that respects that, and is willing to honor the ethical quality work you're trying to produce. So if you need to walk, you need to walk, but there's so much work out there.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because it makes me think of, I know this is going to sound odd, but it makes me think of when my son was in elementary school and they were doing these anti-bullying campaigns. And so they were taught the importance of being an upstander, right? So there are bystanders that are witnessing the bullying event. I said, what you need is one person who will be an upstander, right? And tell that bully, no, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Again, the courage to say the words. Because everyone might be silent saying, oh my God, this is awful, this is not okay. But you have to have the courage to speak up. And when you do that, you give permission to everyone else to also say what they need to say. And I just find ethics and just like doing the right things, like, why would anyone have a quandary about that? And how can we flip the script in culture, in business culture, in product development? Or we say, no, actually being ethical is the default. It's sort of like, we are ethical, our the way we do our process, the way we do our product development, the way we do our testing, the way we're looking for safety. When I talked to Mira Lane at Microsoft, we were looking at their HARPS modeling framework, which is a really great comprehensive set of questions around different areas like the environment, sustainability, and privacy, and is there psychological damage that will be done? Is there economic damage? Is there, if the data is out, will it shame or humiliate someone? But they're very, very specific questions. And then you as a designer have to ask yourself, oh yeah, is there a risk of that? And if so, what are you going to do about it? Like, A, do you need to actually collect that data? Oh, no, we don't. So that kind of eliminates that risk. Or if you do, how do you protect the individual? What are the protections around the data? What are the protections around if it's breached? How are you going to make it up to them? But going through that process, then it becomes part of your IP. And I would think that customers would begin to value you because they would know that you actually had their back, that you were actually protecting them.
Yeah.
And that to me seems like a feature, not a bug.
No, and customers want that, right? They can feel when you're exploiting them. People are only still using Facebook because they're addicted to it, right? Like we all got hooked too young, and now we just are obsessed with checking what our classmates will never see again or up to in their lives. Young people are not signing up for that service, right? We don't feel like certain companies are looking out for us, but customers do feel when you put that effort into it. I've been at companies where the customers genuinely know that they're cared for, and the company's doing things, even in little communications. There was a great example, 2pm.com. It's a newsletter for polymaths, and they had a situation. It was a tech glitch, right, where like the email provider kind of hosting their platform is sending all of these emails to their customers, and it just came out of nowhere. It was very frustrating, and The response, the owner of the company apologized. He explained what happened, but the response by the community was, "Oh, we know you care about us. We are so grateful for you and the work that you're doing, and we know you genuinely care. So we're going to let this go. We're going to forgive you." Way back in like 2011, 2012, Buffer, which is just a really nice, friendly company. I love Buffer. They had like a hack, right, where like some user data was compromised, and they were so transparent through the whole thing. And again, because they built up all this goodwill beforehand by genuinely caring about their customers and by always acting with that integrity, that consistency, that their customers' well-being came first. The customers were completely willing to forgive these things that just happen to everybody. And like you were saying, so many people feel the same way about wanting to do the right thing. But I think most people want someone else to go first. And that's human nature, right? Like, how do we get to survive thousands of years of history without getting eaten by tigers, right? We let somebody else go into the bushes first. And if they survive, then we can go too, right? It's in our genetics. It's self-preservation. But now we're in a world where there's no wandering tigers, right? But we still have that same thing. So we're sitting in a meeting, and we're all, for the most of us, there's like maybe that like 1% of real innovators working for startups who thrive on the danger, thrive on the risk, who want to be brave and bold. But the 99% of the people working today are for companies that existed before they got there. This includes small businesses that they start themselves. But I think most of us in the corporate world, right? I didn't start IBM, but if I get a job at IBM, I'm getting that job because I want the stability. I want the predictability of the paycheck every 2 weeks. I want the health benefits. So I'm motivated by safety. And understanding that actually gives those of us willing to stand up so much leverage, because we don't have to be very courageous at all. We just have to be a little bit courageous to stand up and say, I'm willing to go first about this thing that doesn't have big stakes, but nobody else wants to do it. I'm willing to say, is this ethical? Can we do better? Is there a way that we can structure this marketing campaign in a way that's actually offering real value instead of having artificial scarcity? Is there ways that we can avoid dark patterns in our apps and avoid trying to make the cancellation process too burdensome because we're trying to squeeze as many recurring subscription payments this month as possible, right? Just being willing to ask those questions first, and then it just opens the floodgates for everybody else, where I think generally speaking, people are good. People want to do the right thing. People don't want to hurt other people, but we're also very concerned about being the first ones out the gate. So if you're
so we
willing to
need
be
to
just,
normalize it, right? We need to normalize just, of course we're inclusive, because look at our team, right? Of course we're doing this, of course, because these are the customers that we serve. And having it, what I'd like is, what I would hope for is that we can be more authentic about all of this. That doesn't feel so forced, and a little bit, it's kind of like learning how to salsa. You're kind of awkward, like you gotta relax, but at some point, or riding a bicycle, you keep on doing it until it gets in your muscle memory. How do we get ethics, inclusion, equity, justice into the muscle memory of how we perform as professionals, as businesses, as innovators, and saying like, wow, if I could do this, I can really tap into a global market, right? Inclusion isn't just about, whether or not you tan. It could be, it's really interesting. So I look at like major retailers like Target and how they're doing more inclusive clothing design. Now, seniors have been around forever, and they needed that, but it was sort of a bittersweet observation that we have so many younger people who have been in the military, who have been in combat, who have limbs that are missing or so on, or impaired in some way, that it is now a sizable enough market that a major retailer says we're going to have inclusive design and clothing. And you're going like, oh, wow, but it's good for older folks, and it's good for other people. So anyway, I sort of went off on a tangent there. We were talking a little bit about Airbnb in Charlottesville.
yes.
Tell me that story.
Just as it just takes one person in a meeting to say, let's think about this, guys. Everybody, let's think about this and how we are and whether we're actually serving our customers or not with this, we see the same thing happening on the macro scale as well, right? We see with companies, when one company decides to do the right thing, so many other companies, you realize they wanted to do the right thing too. They were just afraid to go first. Well, look at Airbnb in Charlottesville, right? Airbnb says, hold on, if you're here for this Nazi rally, we are not interested in having your business, and you can take your money back. And they cancel reservations for people attending this Unite the Right rally. So many other companies then realized, wait, you can do that? That's okay. And the majority of people are okay with that too. And you see this domino effect that ends up with people like Alex Jones getting deplatformed. And, the whole issue of like censorship and stuff online is a big one, but we also see that like deplatforming works when it comes to hate speech. We saw the same thing with Parler, right? And the Capitol attacks that happened 6 weeks or so ago. Nobody wanted to ban certain voices of hate from their platforms first. Nobody wanted to go first because they were afraid of see what would happen. Well, somebody went first, and I think it was the world didn't end, right? You see, Apple says, okay, we're pulling Parler from the App Store because this is not what we want to be associated with, and Google's like, oh, you could do that? Okay, we're pulling it too. And then Amazon's like, hold on. We can't let you guys take all the credit for doing the right thing. We're going to pull their hosting, right? And so you see this domino effect, and now Parler is on just this garbage hosting, and it's done. It's over, right? Yeah. And the investors are going to try to squeeze as much as they can out of it, but it's no longer going to be able to have the mainstream effect it possibly could have if Apple hadn't said, okay, we're finally going to pull this thing from the App Store. And so big scale, small scale, it just takes one person to do the right thing. And then everything else, you're kind of opening the floodgates for everyone else to be brave too. And that's what we need right now. We need to realize how much power we have. And we're living in a world that's trying to make us feel disempowered, that's trying to make us feel like we need someone to gatekeep us and tell us it's okay to move forward. And the best thing we can do for the people we serve, for the life we're trying to build for our children, and for the people who now finally have an opportunity through technology to become re-franchised, to no longer be disenfranchised by systems that have been designed to keep them down. We can fix this, but it's going to take individuals to say, I'm going to be brave right now. I'm going to be brave for 10 seconds. I'm going to ask this question that's going to make me a little bit uncomfortable, but then immediately is going to be followed by several other people in the room saying, I had the same question. Let's all talk about this together. So there's so much opportunity for us to do the right thing. We just need people here and there to lead us. And that's why we need you, right? We need what you're doing, right? With this podcast and with the people who are showing up and listening to this podcast. These are all the people, if you're listening to this, you need to be that leader and just ask the question, who's this really serving? Can we do better?